Boa noite. Iniciamos o programa Encontros do Mundo em Lisboa, onde se convida os embaixadores acreditados em Portugal para falar sobre o seu país, a sua cultura, a agenda cultural desenvolvida no nosso país, onde mostram as suas atividades culturais, os seus objetivos económicos, entre aí as relações diplomáticas entre os nossos países. Tenho o grato privilégio em convidar a senhora Embaixadora das Filipinas, a senhora Embaixadora Celia Feria, que está em Portugal como Embaixadora e que se dispôs muito amavelmente a conceder esta entrevista. Vai ser feita e conduzida na língua inglesa. A senhora Embaixadora fala português com um levíssimo sotaque, mas prefere conduzi-la na língua inglesa para se sentir mais confortável. Para nós não é qualquer tipo de problema. Hello, Ambassador. It's for us a great pleasure to have you as our first guest in this Meetings of the World in Lisbon's program in the channel Matriz Portuguesa Sapo, and welcome to our program. And let me start by saying that after this magnificent video that we have already seen beginning producing our conversation, that we are going to talk about the relationship, diplomatic relationship, not only diplomatic, cultural and economical ones between Philippines and Portugal. And let's start by really understand what are or what have been these diplomatic relations between Portugal and the Philippines.
All right. Well, good evening. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I tried to prepare it in Portuguese, mas acho que é melhor se falamos em inglês. Seria muito mais fácil e rápido. Mas we began our talking about diplomatic relations. Actually, official diplomatic relations with Portugal started in 1946. When the Philippines got its independence from the United States of America. But even before that, before 1946, if we go out maybe 400 years before or more, during the Treaty of Tordesillas and the Treaty of Saragossa, what was interesting was the Philippines always fell under the sphere of influence of Portugal, but because nobody knew that the islands existed then, so there was no contact yet whatsoever. It was only after the Spaniards, the Spanish expedition, which was headed by a Portuguese, Fernando Magalhães, went to the islands and discovered, well, not discovered because the islands were always there, but first Europeans who got to the islands. So from 1946 and 400 years before, there's already been that kind of contacts or interesting data about what could have been a first encounter with Portugal. But to answer your question and to put it in perspective, we did establish diplomatic relations in modern times in 1946 with Portugal. And since then, of course, we've had excellent relations with Portugal. And we're very happy. I'm very happy to be the current ambassador here in Portugal and able to speak to you and give you more information about the wonderful relationship between Portugal and the Philippines.
Ambassador, you have been developing several programs about the culture, not only culture, but even the history from Philippines. Since you are ambassador of the Philippines in Portugal, several programs have been established in Lisbon, not only in Lisbon, I believe. What has the embassy been doing since you arrived?
Well, thank you for that again. What we do here is we try to raise awareness about the Philippines, which is what is the major task of most ambassadors is you raise awareness about your country. And so it's not any different from what I'm doing here, what my task is as the ambassador. So raising awareness, how? Many ways. And one of the ways is by through culture, to history, to promoting commonalities between our two countries. And again, like I mentioned, we have certain historical commonalities, which are, if people would, read on, it's really very interesting. It's something that even me coming here, I've discovered much more about my country and the commonalities that we have with Portugal. There's no doubt that our history is very linked to Spain, because we were a colony of Spain for over 300 years. Then after Spain, the Americans came. And so there is this anecdote that says that the history of the Philippines, in summary, is 300 years in the convent and 550 years in Hollywood. No? So it's a very interesting way of summarizing so many years of history. But if you go before the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, and then again, like I talked about and mentioned about these things with the Treaty of Tordesillas and Treaty of Saragossa, and how we actually fell in the Portuguese sphere of influence many, many years ago. I mean, when you think of what could have happened had your Portuguese navigators gone to the islands before the Spaniards came, maybe we'd be speaking with more, maybe we'd be speaking Portuguese now. No? But then going again to the culture, moving forward, 400 years after, what we do is we highlight, like I said, common things that we like. The culture is one. That story of Magallanes arriving in the Philippines, sailing for Spain, is because he was Portuguese, we were able to highlight that relationship with Portugal. We've established good relations with the Estructura de Missão, the Quinto Centenario, the Circumnavigação do Mundo pela Expedição Magallanes-Elcano. And through these exchanges, through this, we're able to put our cultural entities, cultural organizations together to come up with activities to highlight similarities in our history and make the relationship much more personal as a result of all these commonalities that we have with Portugal. So last year, and I'm glad we started last year, because this year seems to have just passed by without anything being able to happen. So last year we had quite a lot of activities. We had a film, retrospective film showing at the Cinemateca here in Lisbon, and then we also had we participated in the bazaar, Diplomático, where we're able to highlight several of the products that you actually see. I don't know if you're able to see it here, but it's part of the embassy, part of my office. Traditional things, traditional artisania with the Philippines has. We also had an exhibit of what you call banigs or estrellas, Filipinas. All these things made by women in rural areas in the Philippines. And what we also had was the conference on Magallanes. So what we did was we bring in things so that people, the Portuguese public, would know more about the Philippines through things that are interesting and catchy. And they highlight the wonderful culture that we have. And we want to bring in also through these activities what we say are the shared narratives, como historias partilhadas, with Portugal. And like I said, we're very happy we started last year. So we may have to skip 2020, or we have to find new ways of promoting the Philippines, such as what you're doing now with this kind of medium. But we hope that 2021 will give us more opportunities to go out there again and visit places. We've done this not only in Lisbon, but we've been to Alentejo. We've been to Feria do Alentejo. We've also been to Sabrosa. We've been all around because Portugal is not just Lisbon. Portugal is the entire country. And we would like to go out there. If the situation allows us, we'd like to go out perhaps next year again and spread word about the Philippines here in Portugal.
You have as well last year, yes, indeed, this 2020, it was quite a bump in all our agendas. and you had a special one, a special program. It was the commemoration of the arrival of the circumnavigation of the planet, and you had an extensive program to fulfill. And in this matter, you brought, you invited, you came to Portugal, some of your scholars, your Philippine scholars, to discuss, to have a dialogue with ours, which I believe it's a very beautiful way and a very interesting way of melting and debating these subjects. What was the result of this?
Well, we were very pleased that it was for the first time we had this conference called Magallanes, Magellan. So those are the three names by which the same person is called. So Magallanes to the Portuguese, Magallanes to the Spaniards, and to the Philippines, how we know him as Magellan. So we brought in 5 of the most renowned historians in the Philippines in this field, and we had, for the first time at the Sociedad de Geografía, a conference. This was when we were able to tell our stories here in Portugal. We structured it that it would be, we had stories about the Philippines before the arrival of the expedition. So we had historians who talk about what it was like in the islands, which was not called Philippines yet at the time, but the islands at the time of the arrival of that expedition. And then we had also somebody talk about what it was like in Malacca, because that was what brought the Europeans to our part of the world, was the spice trade, the spices and everything that was happening in that area in Malacca. And then we talked about, there was a historian who talked about the arrival of Magallanes in the Philippines, and then the post, how we view Magallanes now in Philippines, in Philippine history. So I believe we were able to bring our narratives about Magallanes to Portugal. And as a result also, we were able to add more to the body of information about the man Magallanes to what we feel is to Europe, to the European scholars. Previous to our conference on Magallanes, we already had activities with the Centro de Humanidades of CHAM. We had met with them before. It was all part, again, of this sharing of narratives. So what we did was we tried to look for Asian experts here in Portugal. And then we wanted to find out more about our history as seen through the eyes of the Portuguese explorers, historians. So we have a program with the Centro de Humanidades of the Universidad Nova Lisboa, wherein we have a project on the first ever bibliography about the Philippines found in Portuguese archives and libraries. We also have an ongoing translation of certain articles written by Portuguese historians about the Philippines, but have never been read in the Philippines because they were written in Portuguese. And so we're translating those into English. And we have about 3 more pending cultural activities with this group of historians here in Portugal. And why is it important? It's important because for us, we want to see our history from another perspective. I think I explained earlier, we have, the Spanish and then the American part of our histories. And there's many things written about the Philippines from the Spanish and from the American point of view. But we also wanted to see from another point of view, which is Portugal, because there are many historical accounts of Portuguese navigators, Portuguese explorers who went to our part of the world, even before and during and after the arrival of all the other of the Spaniards and the Americans to the Philippines. So we just want to show, like I said, this is part again of our shared narratives. We share with you and you share with us. So we enrich the history, the culture of both our countries, both our peoples.
And there is something that the embassy, and particularly with your particular interest, is to show the Filipino gastronomy in Portugal, because it was quite unknown in Portugal. We didn't quite know this gastronomy, and we have been doing such a great job about this, and when we had this one of these opportunities, it was when Matriz Portuguesa held this dinner, Mesa Palatina, and you were our guest of honor, and you provided some of your local ingredients and dishes, and indeed it's quite different because gastronomy tells a story as well. Gastronomy is also an ambassador of of a country.
Yes.
Not to find, and you have I believe you had several years ago an embassy, a gastronomic embassy in Europe, led by a Filipino chef. Was that right?
Well, there were several, talking of food, though, yeah, we tried to introduce also Filipino food here, and I'm very thankful to you for giving us an opportunity to promote Philippine food here in Lisbon. We Filipinos love to eat. It's part of our culture. When you come to the embassy, or you come to my house, or you come to the embassy, we feed you. We give you either dried mangoes, or we feed you something. We always feed our guests. It's part of the culture. It's part of the welcoming ceremony. But I think that's very Asian also. It's very Asian, it's very Oriental. And we have a community of Filipinos here. And it's not as much as they are in other parts of Europe, for instance. But we have a group of about 2,000 Filipinos who are here. And a few of them are chefs. And that was one of them was one I brought over for the Mesa Palatina about the Philippines. Our food is really very interesting. It's a mix of Asian, European, and well, American influences and ingredients. But going back to what you were saying about like a gastronomic embassy here in Europe, we've had several big chefs who established restaurants here in Europe. Many years ago in Paris, we had a very famous lady by the name of Nora Dasa, and she set up a very famous restaurant in Paris of Philippine, featured Philippine food. In London now we have a restaurant called Romulos. It's pretty new in the sense it's been, I think, about 3-5 years maybe, and it's also been the hub of Philippine food in London. And then talking of Filipino, well, maybe it's not really cuisine, but influence in food. We have now a very famous Filipino fast food chain. They've opened up in Milan and in London, and it's very famous. It's actually in the Philippines, it's much more famous than McDonald's. It's called Jollibee, and they opened in Milan and in London, and I think they're opening in other cities. I don't want to preempt the management, but it's been quite famous. So, Philippine cuisine is trying to get up there. We have young Filipino chefs in like I said, in London, in France, in Spain now. We're trying to develop the same here in Portugal, so that they can incorporate Filipino cuisine and ingredients in the food scene here in Portugal. Especially here in Lisbon. We had, I think it was in 2018 when we had a food festival at the Altish Avenida. It was called Sabores das Filipinas, and it was going on for, I think, 10 days. And we had 2 famous Filipino chefs, and they, I think, for about 2 weeks, had Filipino food for lunch, buffet, and then in the evening, it was a fusion of Portuguese Filipino cuisine that was cooked by the Portuguese chef of the Altis Avenida. And so it was interesting to have this, to see how you create maybe similar tastes to the Portuguese palate using different kinds of ingredients, which can be found, by the way, here in Portugal.
Yes, we were quite surprised, our guests, when they found out that they were to be served piglet, lechon.
Yes, lechon, yeah, which lechon is the only difference here, Joao, is that you cook the small one. You cook the leitao. We actually cook the bigger one.
Oh, really?
Cook the baby. We cook the teenager.
Yeah, so fun.
Put it
But,
in our terms.
but that American chef, he already died, unfortunately, Anthony Bourdain.
Bourdain, yeah, that's right.
He considered the Filipino lechon the best of the world he has ever tried. And we saw that because you had different ways of a special way of cooking it, and we were quite amazed. So really, we have this bridge connecting our tastes, our flavors, because and the other dish I don't quite remember the name.
We had adobo. We had
Yes, it was as well a fusion with Filipino and Spanish dish, wasn't it?
it was maybe the style of cooking, yeah, like the adobado style, but we used traditional ingredients, which is basically vinegar, because in the Philippines it's warm, it's humid, it's tropical. We need to preserve food. So the way to preserve food is either you salt it, so we have a lot of dried fish, like your version of the bacalhau, or if it's chicken or pork, we do with vinegar, so adobo. And there's many versions, but the main ingredient is always the vinegar. So you can add soy sauce if you want, or take out the soy sauce, put ginger, turmeric. So it depends on which region of the Philippines you are. Each one has a version of adobo. Like, I guess here, every household has a version of a bacalhau dish, right? So we have a version of our adobo dish. And together with the adobo, we serve something quite interesting, which is called laing, which was gabi. It's made out of a root crop called a big leaf that they dry. And then you dry the leaves, and then you cook it in coconut milk. And one of the reasons why we decided, and we explained to you why we wanted to show coconut milk, was because the Portuguese is familiar with that kind of flavor because of the African influence in your gastronomic culture. A lot of the former
And even Asian, yes.
The Portuguese former colonies and Portuguese-speaking countries now still in Africa, they cook a lot with coconut milk. So that's something that we also share, I guess, with the Portuguese world, which is the coconut milk.
Yes, we felt quite at home. Quite at home with the menu served. Of course, certain flavors were not a surprise, but were not known to us.
Yeah.
And we found out that really there is always a tendency that if this country is near the other one, so it must be equal. No, it's not. Filipino gastronomy has its own personality, of course, and thanks God for that. And do you have any restaurant? Because I know that you have in Portugal, I don't know only in Lisbon or not, at least one or two professionals, they're cooks. I don't know if they are chefs, but that they cook by order for events, caterers. They are, shall we say, caterers of Filipino gastronomy.
Yes.
I know them personally, at least two
Yes.
of them. But is there a restaurant in Portugal, Lisbon, or Porto?
There used to be here in Portugal, in Lisbon. But no, unfortunately, we don't have a restaurant right now. But we have caterers here in Lisbon and also in Porto. But now, I think what's interesting is there's a lot of young Filipinos coming here to learn cooking as well, because here they find that there's new flavors. And because the Portuguese food is gastronomy is it's different from us, no? Like I said, most of our influence is basically Spanish, American, and well, the countries around the Philippines. So Portugal is something new. You have fresh flavors that we would like also to bring to the Philippines. So we're having a lot of interest from the young chefs. Again, unfortunately, the COVID-19 happened, and so they're not able to come here. But we will try, because it's part of the exchange. We promote our ingredients and our cuisine here. And we would also like to promote the flavors of Portugal to the Philippines, because it helps make the world much more delicious when we have different kinds of flavors and we mix it with our cuisine. But you're right, there's a caterer here called A Diplomata, and she's been helping us a lot in our events. When we have National Day celebrations or events that we organize, again, this is pre-COVID, we decided to start serving Filipino menus. So we would put what we call rice toppings. So we would use Filipino ingredients like a coconut shell, which is very traditional Filipino. We would put rice, which is a very staple of Philippine cuisine, Philippine food rather. We eat rice morning, noon, and night. Like tonight, we will eat rice tonight. What it would be what your bread is. It would be rice to us in many forms. And then we would serve different kinds of Filipino toppings on that. Adobo, laing. Then we would have our what we call fried lumpia, our spring rolls, which again can be in any.
Are delicious.
You can put anything inside those, as long as you wrap them very well. It's mostly vegetables is what we use. But we're very lucky because we have many stores here that carry Filipino ingredients as well. So it's not difficult to do a gastronomic event here in Portugal. Plus, the Portuguese are very adventurous when it comes to tastes of food, and we're very happy for that. Because we're able to.
You have participated. The embassy has participated in a festival, I believe, of street food.
Yes,
this concept is known to us, of course. We know the realities are all over the world, and street food, I believe, it's something that in Asia, all over the countries, it's quite natural, quite daily basis, and people eat, have lunch, have dinner. They have a snack on the street. And you asked me during one of our conversations that why don't you do something like this in Portugal? I told you we don't have this habit, this costume of eating on the street. We have small cars with a little bit of sandwiches and so on. But no, but this is quite interesting because it's not only the act of selling, is to cook where at an open cook everyone is seeing is what the chefs are now doing. It's a master chef cooking on the run, and why not doing this indeed really a fusion experience between the Filipino and the Portuguese. You have talked we have mentioned the Filipino community in Portugal. How many are there in Portugal? Are they living only in Lisbon? They are spread out through all the country. What are their main occupations?
We say we have less than 2,000 Filipinos in Portugal. Although if you go by the statistics of CEF says there are about 800 Filipinos. But then the rest would be made up of Filipinos who are now Portuguese citizens, or Filipinos who are married to other European nationals who have settled into Portugal. So there's quite a mix of the different kinds of Filipinos who are here. The majority live in the Lisbon area, and of course in Porto. But we were surprised to know that there's also quite a few in the Azores, and also in I think in Madeira there's like one or two. And so it's nice to see that they're all over. but the majority is actually really here in the Lisbon area, Lisbon and Porto area of Portugal. And it's a new migration. It's a new migration. I think the height of the, because like Portugal, we're also a migrant sending country, you know? And the height of the migration to Portugal must have been during the turnover of Macau, when there were a lot of Filipinos who were working for Portuguese families in Macau. And when those families returned to Portugal at the turnover, they brought with them their Filipino household members, and they've stayed here. And that's how some of them had been able to come here. And then some have also, through Africa, they were working in Africa, they met their Portuguese spouses, and then they were brought to Portugal. It's very interesting when I meet the Filipinos and I hear the different stories. I always have to ask, what brought you to Portugal? And it's amazing that the different kinds of stories that you hear, because again, like I said, traditionally, we're not, we have a lot of Filipino migrants in the United States, of course, a lot. We have about 3 to 4 million Filipinos here. Yes, because of the close relationship we have, because of the historical history of America, right? I, for one, have my entire family is in America, mostly in the West Coast, and then in New York, and also in Chicago. We have a lot of professionals there. And also because we speak English. So migrating for jobs, it's easier for us in English-speaking countries, which is why we also have more Filipinos, for instance, in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, because we speak English. So it's easy for them to get jobs. A lot of Filipinos work in the health sector, for instance, in the United Kingdom. And then, so migration here is pretty recent. It's pretty new. But we're very happy with the Filipino community here. It's small, but we're very active. We're very active. We engage with them through social media. And right now we have a competition, because it's because we can't go out and we can't hold Independence Day events. So we have an ongoing competition now. Well, it's not competition, it's more like a cooking contest. No? We've asked Filipinos to send us recipes and then pictures of the food that they prepared at home or for their friends, and to send us a picture of the ingredients that they use. It must be Filipino ingredients, the final product. And we wanted to hear the comments of the Portuguese who were eating their food. And we have a price that's like, 100 euros, 50 euros, 75 euros. And it's fun because we were able to engage with the Filipino community without having to, face-to-face interaction with them. But we're trying to do more things together, like this. Before you know it, we'll probably have some kind of interview also with the Filipino community to find out what's happening to them. Because we have to find ways now. The new normal will be soon.
Reach out to keep on going.
Yes.
This is a very good way of continuing.
Of course, we hope we find a vaccine for this, so that finally we can again come up with
the better. Yes.
Yeah, so we can have.
I believe that there is in Philippines a special building that was, I believe, the Portuguese embassy that now became bibliothèque, gallery, something like that.
I think what it was is when the Portuguese embassy, so we established diplomatic relations in 1946. And then for a long time, we were covered by the embassy, I believe there was no resident embassy in Manila for a while. And then we closed our embassy here in 1974. And then Portugal closed its embassy in the Philippines in 76. And then it was not until 1997 that Portugal went back and reopened its embassy. And they were there until 2007. What had happened was the books that form part of the embassy of Portugal, when they closed, they donated it to the university, the Ateneo University. Ateneo de Manila University, which is actually where a lot of a lot of our historians who came here are actually affiliated with the Ateneo University of Ateneo de Manila.
And of course, it goes without saying that the Philippines is well known all over the world by its natural beauties, the landscapes, and the tourism, of course. And now, I believe, as all the countries in the world, that the tourism is shut down.
Yes.
How is the situation in the Philippines during the COVID-19, or now are emerging from this pandemic situation? The perspectives are good.
Well, as you know, we have 7,651 islands. That's a lot of islands to lock down. Okay, and there of those, there's probably 200 or so that are the main islands, and those are the ones that have the most number of people occupied islands in the Philippines. So we have various, there's degrees of quarantine. Metro Manila, of course, because it's very dense. We have more people in Metro Manila than the entire Portugal. So there's now a quarantine that's set up in Manila, Metro Manila. In the other islands, it's less because there's less COVID situation in the other islands. But the silver lining to all this is nature has healed itself. So the beaches are far more beautiful because there's nobody there for 3, 4 months.
They're cleaner.
Clean. It's clean. The air, in fact, the air level in Metro Manila is so clean. We can see the mountains that are about 40 kilometers away that they never even knew was there, because when it was with the fog,
would have to come off this.
Yeah. So now you see beautiful pictures of Metro Manila. What's the same thing about our tourist destinations? It's mostly islands. So Boracay is very clean. The water is so blue. Cebu is the same thing. Bohol, in Palawan, in Siargao, which is the new surfing destination of a lot of young people. Europeans especially, they love to surf, and Siargao and Mindanao is one of the new places to go to. So it's they're resting now. The islands are resting, and they're recovering from wear and tear of when people would go there. So as soon as the tourist season starts, I think it'll be very, very beautiful. For the first tourists to get to the Philippines will have a fabulous time enjoying the wonderful beaches that we have in the Philippines.
What a beautiful way to finish, to close our interview with this optimistic view. The nature has cleansed herself, has healed herself. It's a very optimistic point of view to this situation, this global situation. But I believe it's the only way of looking at things, because if not, we couldn't do anything. There is always a way and an answer. Ambassador, this conversation our conversations are always wonderful, and mainly your passion for food and gastronomy is always evident, and mainly the most important thing is the friendship that unites Portugal and the Philippines, and this is shown in every aspect, in all the communications, the initiatives coming from the Philippines, and the community, Filipino community resident in Portugal as well, because they are so well integrated in our society, which is always a magnificent side of the breeding, the education, the civilization, and the cultural side of the excellence of one's nation. It's very good. Ambassador, was, as always, a pleasure and an honor to have you, and thank you for considering us this short time that precious one of your time to talk with us about your country.
Thank you so much, Joao. Good night to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. And thank you very much for allowing us to share a little bit of our culture and history with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Foi então uma conversa agradabilíssima e, embora sempre curta, com a embaixadora Celia na Feria das Filipinas. Espero que tenham gostado tanto como eu gosto sempre de conhecer outras realidades, outras culturas, outras gentes, que aliás é uma homenagem do povo português, e com as Filipinas que estão em Portugal, bem como a sua comunidade, nós deixamos um voto de esperança, como a embaixadora diz. A natureza arranjou uma maneira de se curar a si própria e, sobre este ponto de vista tão positivo, despedimos-nos com uma amizade. Os Encontros do Mundo em Lisboa voltam para a próxima edição. Obrigado, boa noite.
I woke up while nature was sound asleep, so I could marvel at its kingdom. I strolled through its lush gardens and saw every little wonder up close. Here, you can dance with giants, discover a feast for the eyes, and a feast for the appetite. Walls that hold heroes' stories told me of their bravery, while sacred places blessed my journey. I roamed places that stood the test of time, and others that were there since the beginning.